Chris Walsh. I hope you're doing well. Welcome into the game here in Tuscaloosa.
Thanks for having me.
How many years have you been covering Alabama? I may have added a couple there to you, but
2004. So this will be my 15th season.
Yeah, 15th season. Wow. It's been a fun ride when you look at watching, because we covered the down years of Alabama football and the kind of, Darby to the right, Darby to the left, and now we're getting a chance to cover probably one of the greatest dynasties, if not the greatest dynasty in college football history.
Oh, I'm already on the record as saying it's the greatest dynasty in college football. I did that story, last year before they even won last year's national championship. I don't think there's any doubt anymore. So it's been quite remarkable to watch Alabama during this stretch. And it kind of blows my mind when I sit there and think of how long it's been. It seems like, just a couple weeks ago, I just got here.
Well, it's obviously it's been and I think, Chris, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we'll realize how great this dynasty really is until 15 years down the road. And we'll look back and we'll say, Nick Saban did what? I mean, because we're all in this kind of, it's puzzling to even watch it up close, and we won't really appreciate it until 10 or 15 years down the road.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of truth in that. And that's kind of been my aim. It's different, right? People are going to follow different writers, and certain people are going to specialize kind of in certain things. And one of the things that I tried to do since Alabama won, really in 2009, was okay. Let's go for the perspective. What does this mean? What is it going to mean? And how does it relate to anything in college football history? And every single time I sit there and say, okay, this is it. Now they're at the top. Somehow they keep finding a way to top it. So that's just been it's been amazing.
All right, so let's start back with last Monday. You did a really unique piece all throughout the week. It's kind of been a theme that we've had here for the last few weeks at SECCountry.com, but even you dialed even closer. The all-time Associated Press's top 25. Kind of break this down, maybe as you compile this data, and maybe couple things that stuck out to you.
Yeah, basically, let me take a quick step back, and what I did was a 5-part series, kind of measuring overrated, underrated teams, and we did something on this last year where I took a look at, and the mythology was very simple. It was you take the preseason AP poll, you take the postseason AP poll, and you measure the difference. And we did it last year, and it was, okay, what are the most overrated and underrated teams for the last 5 years, 10 years, and 25 years? And even when I was working on it back then, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to go back and take it another step here. And that is, do an all-time list for both overrated and underrated, and kind of also, measure it by decade, which I thought was kind of a standard, measuring barometer, if you will. But for Monday's story and the all-time AP, it was I needed a starting point. I needed to have something where it's like, okay, these, according to the Associated Press, since 1936, are the best teams in college football. And it's something that I used to use when I used to I don't know if you remember, but I used to do something on who has the best college football program, which was kind of a measuring stick for past and present, and you could kind of see which programs were on the rise and so forth. And that was while working with some different news organizations. But the all-time AP was originally done by one of the SEC staffers. They used to include this in the media guide. And the reason why they did so was because there were so many teams in the SEC that were obviously top 25 programs, the best 25 in college football history. It was obvious. And they stopped doing it for some reason about 10 years ago or so. So this was kind of my starting point. And it's for this one, it takes the final AP poll and it adds up the points just like it does every single week, and who has the most points over, that entire time period. And Oklahoma had been number one for a long, long time. And Alabama is now, basically, I think they're 1 point behind now, which, that could change at any time.
All right, and then you travel to the next on Tuesday, the most underrated college football teams per decade. Talk about that, because I always think it's fun to look at the teams that maybe overachieved.
Yeah, and that was kind of, if you're going to do overrated, you got to do underrated. And kind of going into it, I was really kind of wondering how like the Utah schools would do. Brigham Young had its heyday, if you will. Utah is one of those programs that seems to always be good that no one really talks about. That's the last 15, 20 years. And those Western schools. I mean, Oregon, before Nike really got involved and it started changing all its jerseys and everything. I mean, when I was young, Oregon was not really a big deal, and now it is. So it's kind of interesting. For me personally, I wanted to see how those Western schools did, and they were obviously a big part of by the decade, and just taking a look at who's kind of grown over the years. Like Boise State, where did they come from, kind of thing. So that was a lot of fun for me.
So then you went most overrated of the decade, and you divide it up, and you work all the way from the 30s all the way to current day, and you got some pretty big names here in these different decades of eras of college football. Yeah,
and it's kind of interesting to me, and I'll freely admit this to you. When I came up with the idea for doing this, I thought, okay, Notre Dame's going to end up number one, and we're going to see a couple decades, especially, the 80s and so forth. You take away the Lou Holtz years, but how many times has, Notre Dame you've been hearing, oh, they're going to be great this year, and then they're just not, kind of thing. So I didn't add everything up beforehand. It was just kind of like, going along and just kind of seeing how it worked out. But certain teams in certain decades, you started to see a little bit of a trend, like Oklahoma and Notre Dame and USC. And something that really just jumped out to me immediately when I started adding this up is how much easier it is for a top team to fall out of the top 25 than a team that starts out of the rankings to really climb. It's a lot more rare, if you will. So I kind of knew back, early on, it was like, okay, we're going to see some really big names, as being overrated. Nebraska is another big one, obviously.
Yeah, and obviously you see these teams that get a lot of love, and it seems like you're right, though. Every time this time of the year, we're always getting these hype teams. And it's like, and I hate to use this word, but it's almost media-created hype. I mean, we're almost the guilty party here of overhyping a certain team. I'm talking about us as a group, and then when we get to December, this team's no longer standing tall.
I think that's definitely true, but another aspect, obviously, is injuries. Like Florida State last year, they started off number 3, lose a starting quarterback, and that team just went into a nosedive. And those kind of things happen, and it happens a lot more than I think people realize. So when I started getting a little bit more into it and I started looking at, okay, who's the most overrated team, I went back and I updated the numbers from the original series for, the 5, the 10, the 25 years. And Florida State's now the most overrated program in the last 25 years, and that surprised me a little bit.
Hey, Chris, let me go back to a couple different things. And I want you cover Alabama for a living. You've covered Nick Saban. Do you ever think that Nick Saban gets painted unfairly on this grad transfer rule? I mean, maybe I'm just my soapbox, but it seems like Nick Saban's on this side. The rule went against him. I think all Nick Saban was doing is enforcing the rule, as he's told us multiple times. You ever think he gets treated unfairly on this grad transfer rule?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. And, it's one of those things where, oh, you're the bad guy because you won't let the player go where he wants to go. Well, that player, wanted to go to Alabama originally. That player got a ton of money to do so. He, and is going to get, hopefully in many cases, a degree. The school has invested a lot of money, time, and effort into that player. So people don't really consider that part of it. They just like, that's the establishment, and they get money, and they're fine. I definitely see both sides of it. And when it comes to Saban in particular, it seems like every single year, everyone's taking shots at him. It's just the topic changes, and more times than not, it's when the dust settles, you go back and you look at it and you go, hey, he was right, and these other schools are obviously so desperate to find some sort of success, and it's not just the SEC, it's everywhere, that I think a lot of times they don't quite think about the ramifications of what they're doing. And when there are some of these changes, when they sit there and say, well, we're going to do this because it's going to help us against Alabama's going to circle around and do the same thing back to you, kind of thing. So it doesn't work out. And I actually had a column last week about how you can make whatever rule change you want. Nick Saban's going to beat you. He's still going to win. So, and part of that is a lot of these coaches who are, supporting some of these measures, they're so desperate to get like that big win kind of thing. And then, 3 years, they're somewhere else. So, I definitely think he keeps taking hits when it's, he's just like, look, this is our rule. I'm going to uphold it. I don't understand why the other coaches aren't upholding it.
See, I totally agree. I mean, I hear a lot of people talking about, well, Nick Saban didn't get his way. We had a guy on the 2 o'clock hour that said, well, that was the Nick Saban rule, or Nick Saban did not get his way. I think all Nick Saban was doing is enforcing the rule. And matter of fact, he's the one that mentioned it in Destin. He said, let's go in this room and let's change it. If we don't want this rule, let's all vote and we'll throw it out. And certainly that's what happened.
Yeah. And, here's the thing that they're not realizing is that he is going to turn around and, how many guys are going to want to now transfer to Alabama? And it's going to be a lot more on that side. I just think it's going to work to Alabama's benefit in the long run.
How do you like this red shirt rule? Do you like it? Love it? You think it's good for college football?
I'm pretty indifferent. I understand kind of both sides of it, and I think a lot of people are saying, "Oh, this is going to be just totally awesome," and you get a little bit more leverage on saving a year for a guy, and that happens, but it's not as often as I think people realize. So we're just going to have the same problem on a different level. But I'm willing to give it a shot and kind of go a year or two and then kind of make up my own mind.
All right, Chris. Now on a personal side, a little bit. How cool was yesterday for you?
Yesterday was a lot of fun. For those who don't know, I'm a first time dad. My wife and I had our first child last fall, so that was my first. Father's Day has been something I've been trying to avoid for about 25 years, and just kind of ignoring. Now all of a sudden, it has a very different meaning to me. It was pretty special.
Yeah, and you get those messages because I remember it, and you get those Happy Father's Day, and it's like, is that for me? Is that yeah? You get those text messages. Yeah, that's for you.
It was a little different. In fact, I still have a couple I have to respond to.
Well, Chris, listen, great work on SEC Country. I keep asking you every time that we have you on, man, you got to update the Nick Saban versus college football because you wrote that several years ago. It's very relevant to the way that you laid out that book, but it's a lot of updated material, and we're looking at a pretty solid season. I think that Alabama's going to go on this year, and a lot of expectations around this team going into the 2018 season.
Well, I do have another book in the works, but I don't have a publisher yet, so I don't really want to say what it is until I get that lined up. But
what a tease! What a tease!
Yeah, it's sorry, but I think you're going to like it. I'll put it that way.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I cannot wait. Chris, as always, thank you again. Let me invite people, if you want to connect with Chris, it's called Ryan Walsh, WALSH, on the Twitter account. Chris, as always, thank you for your time, and I hope you have a great day. We appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Ryan. Good talking to you.